This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends. Hello and welcome to Exvangelical. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. Before we get to this conversation I had with Brad Onishi last week, I want to share some other news that also broke last week, which is that I'm writing a book. It's completely wild to me that this is actually happening, and I am extremely grateful for the opportunity. The book, which is titled Exvangelical and Beyond, will demonstrate how the explosion of exvangelical and post-evangelical content and perspectives over the last 5 years is actually part of a longer history of people leaving white evangelicalism. It'll also touch on why new technologies like social media have been both instrumental and inflammatory in that process, and how a post-Trump, post-January 6th environment demands the end of white evangelical hegemony. I'm extremely grateful to Convergent for helping me make this project a reality. Publishing a book has been a lifelong dream, and this is a privilege I absolutely do not take for granted. When I think back on this, this conversation you're about to hear with Brad Onishi is really sort of a 1 year on retrospective of what we've experienced since the 2020 election, the 2020 election, and everything that's happened since then, the establishment of the big lie, the January 6th insurrection, and really this podcast and everything that has followed since really happened within the shadow of November 8th, 2016, when Trump was elected president. And it's just absolutely wild what has occurred over these last 5 years, and Brad and I touch on that. We have a conversation about some of the things that have been in the news recently, and I'm excited to share it with you. Brad is, of course, one of the hosts of Straight White American Jesus, which is also an Irreverent Media podcast. We'll get straight into this. I should be establishing another more routine release schedule. This was slotted for last Friday, but I actually had, honestly, just some computer problems from Friday through today. So I apologize for the late delay and hope to be back on a more regular release cadence here through the end of the year, as well as looking forward into 2022. If you want to stay abreast of anything that is happening with this podcast or with my writing, the best place to do that is through my newsletter, the Post-Evangelical Post. 25% of any paid subscription is donated to organizations and individuals that serve communities that have been harmed by white evangelicalism. You can learn more about that at postevangelicalpost.substack.com. You can follow me on Twitter at brchastain, on Instagram and TikTok at brchastain_. All right, let's get into it. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Exvangelical. I have a repeat guest, a serial guest for this show on. You can already hear him laughing a little bit in the background. I have with me a fellow irreverent podcaster and one of the hosts of Straight White American Jesus, Brad Onishi. Bradley, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Blake. Sorry for laughing. When you said serial guest, I wanted to start in on a fake cereal ad just to really set this interview off on a really cheesy foot, but I did not do it. So
this ambiguous criminal trial is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is where everyone goes for $100 a year. Yeah. This is going to be a loose episode, everybody. We're sort of just recording this off the cuff. But Brad, the last time I actually had you on my show, I've been on Straight White American Jesus with you and with your co-host Dan throughout this year. But the last time I had you on Exvangelical was actually as part of the first season of Powers and Principalities. I had you on as a guest, and then I also had you on as this sort of post-election analysis segment that we did. And at the time, I'm pretty sure the election hadn't even been called for Biden yet. We were like, it was that weird week where everyone is just glued to their couches and, doom scrolling like exponentially, trying to understand the state of things. Eventually, the fast forward a year, almost a year to the day, and Biden was elected. But before we got to that period, there was the insurrection, um, which changed everything. You wrote in the New York Times a couple weeks later about how that insurrection really was the beginning of a creation myth, and now I think you've been proven right. That was this this sea change moment that we now call the big lie, and we're sort of seeing other things come to light, like post-election analysis of this Virginia race that just happened, and this entire year of Biden trying to push forth his agenda, and Manchin and Sinema being internally, like within the party, being obstructive. And throughout all of this, we can't forget the involvement of white evangelical leaders and Christian nationalists in pushing the GOP agenda. Your show is very keyed into current events and politics and how religion and culture relates to that, as is much of your work. And why I thought it was a great time to check in with you was really just to get your assessment of where we are now. I sort of touched on some of the big things that have happened over the last year, but looking at where we are in November 2021 versus November 2020, what's your sort of assessment in this moment about where we are?
One of the words that I've had in my head this week is interregnum, which is just a great college word, and it's a great SAT word, right? So inter, like between or among, and regnum, like reign. And the question for me is, whose interregnum are we living through? So is this a situation where we had 8 years of Obama, we had the unprecedented and unforeseen years of Trump, Biden is elected in this overwhelmingly strange and contentious, to say the least, election, and we're now on the road to build back better, and whatever that means, for the next 2024, after that 2028, whether it's Biden or Harris or anyone else, and we're going to look back on these 4 years of Trump as this nadir of the early 21st century for the United States? Or is it a situation where what happened with Trump was a populist uprising in American politics that was fueled by white grievance and resentment, that the Biden victory, narrow in terms of the electoral college, is now the eye of the storm? And what happened in Virginia, what happened in New Jersey in a different way, we can talk about, is a sign that the Biden years are going to be the years that we were in the eye of the storm. And what comes in 2024 is another Trump presidency or something like it. And we're then on the road to something truly scary, even beyond what happened in the first Trump presidency. So how is the interregnum going to be framed when history tells the story? That's my question right now.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it, because I don't know about you, and I know you. I still feel like we've moved beyond the insurrection itself far too quickly. The gravity of that moment, just because of, we were for the most part still in a pre-vaccine sort of world. Most of us didn't have access to it at that point. We were still primarily, if we were adhering to CDC guidance and things like that, we were staying home as much as possible and doing all of that. But at the same time, there was this desire, this rush to return to normalcy, as if that could be something that could be achieved. And do you think that we'll ever really see the sort of reckoning that moment actually deserves? I suppose, like, just in because it's becoming clear in the way that McCarthy and Trump are trying to blockade discovery, just regular run of the mill discovery. That there's that this implicates. I was searching for the word. Sorry, implicates some people within today's GOP that are still lawmakers.
So I'm writing a book on history of white Christian nationalism, and the final chapters really lead up to January 6th and after, right? And so I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And one of the things that occurs to me is we could have had a situation, right? We could live in an America. We could have a sliding doors movie that I'm sure no one would watch because it'd be overwhelmingly depressing. But still, we could have it like if we wanted. We could see if Gwyneth is available, and we could do sliding doors where we get to January 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 2021, and Lindsey Graham and Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell stay on the line that this was a unilaterally condemnable insurrection attempt, and there is no room for discussion about it. So those guys stay on that track, okay? And then we have the second impeachment of Trump, where Republicans turn on him, and he's actually right. It actually carries forth. Then we have the likes of Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Gosar and Louis Gohmert, right? All of the ones who were reportedly involved in planning meetings with the insurrectionists, the eventual insurrectionists, investigated and prosecuted and expelled from Congress. We could have a situation where Fox News deplatforms anybody who's not willing to condemn the insurrection, right? Like, you can imagine a scenario in the United States where that happens, and you see the insurrection as beyond the pale. That if you're going to start talking insurrection stuff at a barbecue or at church or in any polite company, even in red America, that you're in danger of kind of being on the fringe and getting dirty looks, and please don't talk that way around my kids, and get out of here, okay? Mm-hmm. We don't have that. What we have is a situation where as soon as the McCarthys and the Lindsey Grahams realized that the mob was going to stay with Trump, January 6th became the founding event of MAGA Nation's new movement. It's the founding myth now. And so now January 6th is that thing that people look back on, and they call Ashley Babbitt the first patriot martyr, right? In the MAGA movement, after January 6th.
And that's not projection. That's actually what that group calls her.
That's a direct quote. That's not, I'm not paraphrasing. That's a direct quote.
Right. I wanted to make that clear. That wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
how they talk about it.
Exactly. Right. And so we have representatives who are calling Ashley Babbitt, right, treated unfairly an innocent woman. We have the jailed rioters being treated as political prisoners by Matt Gaetz and Paul Gosar and other representatives, right? We have a situation where Tucker Carlson and others are labeling January 6th a false flag, that maybe the Bidens or the Democrats or the whoever's, the George Soros, created January 6th as a way to invent a reason to persecute the right. And they're saying that, it's similar to the new war on terror, right? Here's what I'm driving at. We're not going to get an unflinching and honest treatment of January 6th for a long time in this country. It's not going to happen. And to me, that's where the danger lies, is if you turn it into the foundation for a MAGA myth, a creation story for a new political movement, for a nation within a nation, mm-hmm. You have a situation where the 74 million people who voted for Trump feel as if they are justified in getting revenge. And so we have new data out from PRRI this week that says, right, scary percentages of Republicans and Fox News listeners are willing to engage or think we need to engage in violence in order to set the country back on the right place. We have other polling that says something like 78% of GOP voters think the election was stolen. So the big lie inspires January 6th. And what has happened is not the shrinking or condemnation of that since then, but the growing acceptance and expansion of it into all corners of conservative America, leading to a place where we now, if the election was today, Trump would be the candidate, period, right? And Virginia and New Jersey are sending shivers down the spines of anybody who thinks that the Democrats are just on the path to some sort of, Biden years extended that are going to be somewhat different than what we've experienced over the last 5.
Yeah, and what's the thing? One of the things that I struggle with is just the when it comes to being able to push back against that. As you said, there are people on the right that are willing, even if they know better, even if they know that this is a lie, they play along. And you have to think about Tucker Carlson and a lot of people on the right who remake themselves as, instead of as elites, they remake themselves and present themselves as things that they aren't. And Tucker Carlson engaging in this sort of this faux documentary thing that he's planning to do will be incredibly destructive and corrosive. And the thing that I sort of struggle with is the way in which how we can respond through even our own counteracting media and other even political action feels limited in the way that it can reach those people. It still feels as if even after the Trump administration and the way in which we all retreated to our camps and all of that stuff and everything that people sort of claim that we did, I'm not sure what the alternative is. I'm not sure what other path there is, because the right is an extremely good opponent, and this sort of coalition building that the liberal alternatives offer feels like it almost sometimes I already feel like people are already starting to drift off and like, okay, I can just go back to scrolling TikTok and or whatever, and not realize that these are the times when folks double down, like these leaders double down, and that's I think maybe it's because you and I have this background where we lived in that camp and moved to another one, and I think that is a key insight of people who've left evangelicalism, is realizing how freaking serious this is. But I'm not sure what to do with that.
My take early on in the Biden administration was, look, Democrats, if you guys go big and you make people's lives better, you have a chance to outpace the messaging. Right. So like, yes, you can tune in if you want to Fox News and Newsmax and listen to them freak out about Mr. Potato Head and Dr. Seuss and all of the big bad others that they invent on a nightly basis, CRT, the border, blah, blah, blah. But if you actually have a government that is making your life better through child tax credits, through paid family leave, through other means of providing for people, expanding Medicare, working on prescription drug prices. Okay, if you do those things, then you have a chance to outpace the messaging and to say, look, the Democrats might be super evil and this and that, right? But I don't know actually, because this happened and this happened and this happened. And my life is qualitatively better. Okay. And so there's a chance here to do that. And you could see the path early on in the Biden administration. Now that leads us to Manchinima, right? Manchin and Sinema, who have stood in the way of that. And we can talk more about that in a minute. So I think that's one. I think two, and this is getting to some recent events, right? So we have this governor's race in Virginia that the Democrats lose. And in one sense, it could spell, you could say, hey, this is doom. This is a foreshadowing of what's to come. maybe not, and that's a long conversation, right? But who did the Democrats run? They ran someone who's a former governor of Virginia, an establishment kind of person, right? And somebody who is not going to perhaps excite the young voters of Northern Virginia, or Richmond or Wilmington. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Up in Boston, we have the election of Michelle Wu. Michelle Wu is the first woman of color elected to Boston to be the mayor of Boston. Mm-hmm. Boston, right, is notoriously the history of Boston is one rife with whiteness. Let's just put it straight. Okay. And to have a woman of color elected there is a big deal. And she's a progressive woman of color. Mm-hmm. Right. So the other answer I would say is you can run people like Michelle Wu, right? You can run people who appeal to the people under 30 who are like, here's what we need, right? We need to talk about real police reform. We need to talk about real change when it comes to climate change. We need to talk about real reform when it comes to housing, right? And income inequality, and fill in the blank, right? And so to me, those two things could and can happen, right? In ways that might A, outpace the Republican messaging, and B, continue the excitement and the enthusiasm on the left, okay? But in all honesty, it's a pretty open book as to whether or not that's actually going to take place.
Yeah. Say more about that, actually, because I'm not sure whether I have anything to build off of that.
Sure,
that's a very good point.
Sure, I guess what I'm getting at is, okay, if you make people's lives better, right, in small town America, mm-hmm. you can continue to demonize the Democrats, and Tucker Carlson can zoom in at any time he wants, right? But there are people there who are going to be swayed, okay, and who are going to find that the qualitative changes to the fact that they went to CVS and that the medicine that used to cost $250 a month, right, is now $8 a month, okay? That there's a child tax credit that helps them, just pure and simple, that they get help, right, with child care, that they get help with universal pre-K. All right, I'm a working mom. And you know what? I just got told that my 3 and 4-year-old, right, gets to go to school for free. And now I don't have to worry about $1,500 a month for childcare. Like, we can just talk about issue after issue where you're actually doing things to people that says, hey, if you want more of this, continue to vote this way, right? Okay. That's why when Manchin and Sinema and those folks get in the way of these things that just really matter to real everyday Americans, I think it matters tremendously, right? People care about being able to afford their medicine. People care about whether or not they can safely have their kids go to childcare while they go to work, right? People care if there's a chance to go to college at an affordable rate and maybe get an associate's degree for free and then move on to another university, and so on and so on and so forth. Student loan forgiveness. I can go on and on. Mm-hmm. I think that's a way that you can say, yes, get up there, Steve Scalise and Kevin McCarthy, and tell me why it's a travesty that, Mr. Potato Head might be a different gender than you thought, or not have a gender, or I don't know what, okay? Or tell me why Dr. Seuss is an American hero rather than somebody with a complicated history regarding racism and all kinds of other propaganda, okay? Sure. If that's what matters to you, y'all look silly if there's a party that's actually helping people with their kids and their education and their well-being and their medicine and their health, right? But if you're not going to do that, Democrats, okay, then you're going to fuck around and find out. And what you're going to find out is that we're going to get more of the scary America you just saw from 2016 to 2020. The other thing is, like, look, Stacey Abrams pulled off the impossible in Georgia. And that wasn't just her, so don't email me. I know it was millions and millions of people, organizers, different organizations. What happened in Georgia was incredible. I'm not trying to be dismissive of anyone. I'm just saying Stacey Abrams et al., right? There were so many folks involved there. Okay, right? Mm-hmm. So that happens. And a whole generation of people in Georgia who had never voted before, who had just come of age and voted for the first time, were like, I believe. Let's do it. Because I believe in what these folks are offering me. I believe in Raphael Warnock. I believe in John Ossoff. I believe in Stacey Abrams. I believe in the Asian American organizers who are at the rallies. I believe in the women of color who are leading the charge. If there are more of those movements, there's a chance that even if the QAnon conspiracies and the just unhinged cosmos of conservative conspiracies and myths are still spinning, that you can outnumber them, right? That Georgia was a matter of just out organizing, even in the face of restrictive voting laws and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? You run people like Michelle Wu or others who excite people, right? Who have never voted and don't think the system cares about them. Don't think the system gives one damn about whether or not their lives get any better, right? You run people who you can say, you know what? Yeah, I don't actually think the system cares about me or the government cares about me. I'm 23 and I don't think I'm going to vote. But, look at that person over there. They see me. They're talking to me. I think there's a chance here to do something different. All right, I'll do it. Let's go. I'll get on board and I'm going to bring 2 friends. Okay. You're not going to get there with a kind of centrist neoliberal run-of-the-mill kind of liberal campaign. It's just not going to happen. So those are my 2 things. Now,
right.
Is that going to happen? Probably not. Is that going to outstrip the amazing cosmos of conspiracies and myths that Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump, and all the rest are spinning, and all the evangelical megachurch pastors and others are spinning? I'm not going to, no. I mean, I don't know. It's a sort of open question, but I'm not like overwhelmingly optimistic today about it.
Right. And if you're wondering, as you're listening to this is usually a show about people's explorations of faith and things like that. I have done episodes with Brad and his co-host about that part of their journey, and that's all there in the back catalog. I think the reason why this is important and valuable for both of us is because we understand the role that white evangelicalism has had in constructing this world, constructing this type of political environment, and it's not strictly political, but in order to not just talk about politics, but talk more broadly about social conversation. We have seen this way of dismissing and insisting to change the narrative about different things within American culture right now because of the creation of this boogeyman of critical race theory. Yeah. But it's also led, the thing that has been very effective, I don't want to praise these efforts, but they have been effective, is by drumming up excitement from that side for local elections, like school boards and things like that. So it gets to what you're talking about, where actually on this side that is conspiratorially minded or is aligned with Christian nationalist views, it is getting the support that it needs, and essentially reifying it over and over. And it does lead to scary places. And I'm curious when you look at that, how do you see that factoring into this broader, we've been talking national politics, but it does boil down to local things, even whether it's at the voting booth or in a church, or any other common space like a school, where we're seeing these same battles play out. And I've probably mentioned on the show, like I like the media theorist Marshall McLuhan, and one of his axioms is electric man, just modern people live mythically and all at once. And I really like that because that's how like everything seems to be imbued with like the importance of all things on the line all the time. And coming out, we're still in the midst of a pandemic that definitely still feels that way. So, how are you reading like the interplay of local politics and the way we see these ideas spread through the different networks of the right, and take root in churches and in politics?
Yeah, so I know, and this will bring us back to evangelicalism, because I know the first segment sounded like it was just a politics show. So I apologize to everybody
No,
for
I don't
that.
think you should apologize.
Okay.
I was just, and I'm totally fine with it. That's not something that, it's not always something that I talk about within the context of this show, but it's completely valid, and it's why I wanted to talk to you about it.
Well, I think you hit on two things that are really important in terms of the interplay of evangelicalism and politics. One is um, the right is effective. You used the word effective, and I think one of the reasons it is because of the in or out dynamic of group formation on the right. And so, like,
Mm,
I think we experience this, Blake, and maybe in different ways in the evangelical world is if you butt up against the group's limits in terms of its views on sex or gender, if you want to disagree or sort of introduce difference or heterogeneity, you're
mm-hmm.
probably just going to find yourself on the way out. Like you're
Yeah.
going to like. I had somebody the other day tell me that there's always been these great conversations with evangelicalism. Look at like the emergent church and Rob Bell and Brian McLaren. I mean, there was great dissonance there, and I was like, yeah, because they weren't allowed to be evangelicals anymore. Like they were thrown out. I mean, and they chose to leave, of course. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
here's
Absolutely.
so that's a sort of reference to 2003, 2006, evangelicalism. But here's my point: is if you extract that into the right and the GOP and politics in this country, that sense of conformity is there, right? Mitch McConnell doesn't have a problem getting two senators to get on board with whatever he's trying to accomplish. Okay. Now, is that good? No, because we experienced it. It fuels authoritarianism, right? You either get in line or you leave. I don't want to live in that world. But the word effective there, like use the word effective, is a great descriptor. It's very effective. I think the second thing that you said that to me is so insightful is McLuhan talks about, right, uh, all at the same time. Like everything matters. Okay. When
Mm-hmm.
you're an evangelical, when you're in a high demand religion, you might be LDS, right? You might be a conservative Catholic, you might be Jehovah's Witness, but when you're in a high demand religion, everything matters all the time, right? You wake
Right.
up. I mean, I used to wake up, Blake, and think, is the rapture going to happen today?
Mm-hmm.
Should I go get ice cream after school or should I go witness to 10 people? Because it matters. The world could end today, right?
Yep.
So when local politics go on and you're in that mindset as a religious person, it matters. I got to go to this school board meeting because if I don't, the devil worshiping lizard people might take over my kids' right education. If I don't do this, the whole cosmos might collapse. That's the kind of thinking you get, and it translates into the energy for the PTA, the school board, the mayor, the local supervisor, the county supervisor, the state legislature. And then you look up, and Catherine Stewart's the best at this, right? You go read Catherine Stewart's books, and you realize, oh, local politics has been dominated by the right in this country for so long for that reason. And I think it's because there's an ability to inspire that enthusiasm, because as you just said, everything matters all the time. So if
Yeah.
we don't do this, the world will end. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's one of many tensions at the heart of conservative evangelicalism. And at this point, you don't even need the conservative modifier. We both know that. They pushed out anybody that's liberal from the evangelical camp successfully for the last 150 years. So, um, and that's not really an exaggeration. Like there used to be fights and all that sort of stuff. Um, Nonetheless, uh, that's one of those tensions is about through this like eschatology. Even though this world's gonna burn, we still gotta fight for it. Because one way or another, Jesus is coming. Whether the living room is of Earth itself is picked up or not, whether it's in good order, doesn't really matter. He's still coming, and we gotta look busy. And so, yeah, I mean that is a very animating force, but um, it is such a to me it's a interesting um, it is an interesting thing when we're already seeing element like people starting to analyze the way in which voters like white voters started voting for Youngkin. I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm pronouncing his name
Yeah.
right. I don't
Yeah.
necessarily care, but uh, the way in which that sensitivity, just because even though they may have voted for Biden less than a year ago, that they're living in the moment. They're voting emotionally, and
Yeah.
they've been made uncomfortable, as if that like.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of hand wringing. There's going to be a lot of that, but I'm emotion is something that evangelicalism speaks to,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and this sort of world in which it played a substantial part in forming. Um, that's a motivating factor.
Yeah. Well,
Obviously, it's always been a motivating factor, but the mechanisms that are in place politically, culturally, all align with that sort of expression.
agreed. And even it's funny. I asked. This is another like throwback. I met Stan Grenz one time. I don't know if anybody out there knows who Stan Grenz is, but he was an evangelical theologian, and he died in the early 2000s. And I was right beginning to deconstruct Blake, and I was trying to figure out like, what does it even mean to be an evangelical? Like, maybe I should just leave evangelicalism and like go be an Episcopalian or go be,
Mm-hmm.
United Methodist or something else. And I asked him like, what is evangelical to you after all these years? And he was like, it's an energy, right? Evangelicals have energy. They're motivated, right? And what he was trying to say, and this is not me, but what he was trying to say is like, you may have an Episcopalian who goes to church on Sunday, and maybe that's the only time they thought about being a Christian that week, right? And again, that I'm not trying to caricature anyone out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
Hit,
fine. Say
hit,
what you want to say.
well, but and this is Stan Grenz, and I've had other evangelicals say this to me as well, is like, when you're an evangelical, every random Tuesday, right, is a day where you're going to be thinking about the death and resurrection of Jesus and so on and so forth, right? The energy you're talking about and the emotion is there in evangelicalism, but and it's also motivated by fear, right? So we could talk for 2 hours about QAnon and how QAnon is just this beautiful repository of fear mongering in terms of like
Mm-hmm.
devil worshiping, child devouring people who are going to get you. So if you're not an evangelical, that's another way to get you into the mix of motivated and enthused to come vote in a certain way. The other is CRT. And so if we can for a minute, I'll just say, right, in Virginia, you have this loss of the governorship by the Democrats. So the Republicans win the governorship, the gubernatorial race in Virginia. What people notice is this massive swing in the suburbs on the part of white voters, especially white women. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, this is a big story, but I want to just tie it to CRT. Okay. So if you go to and look at like Virginia suburbs, like Loudoun County and other places, the CRT hysteria has been saturating in those places. What does CRT do? Right? The CRT fear brings all those like fears about the devil worshippers and QAnon and the border and like illegal immigrants, and it brings them right to your kid's school and says that your kid today is being taught that they're evil just by existing. Does that sit right with you? I didn't think so. So let's
Right.
go to the PTA meeting, get your sign, and let's protest. Let's make this happen. Okay. It brings the fear of the border and QAnon and all that right to your kid's school today, right in front of you, right? And all of a sudden, you're that suburban mom who got conscripted into this situation where people are telling you that when your kid goes to school and they're white, they're going to just be taught that they're evil, they should be ashamed of themselves, and they have no right to speak. Okay, so here we are. CRT is a great way to put racism in a bucket that where it's not called just racism, and B, motivate people through an overwhelming fear about the safety and well-being of their children. And all of a sudden, right, you've got white voters in the suburbs who just a year ago were like, we cannot stomach Trump anymore. We cannot stomach any more of this chaos. Being willing to be like, yeah, maybe this Glenn Youngkin guy's got a good point. He's Trumpian. He's not Trump. He doesn't do the lambastic name calling. And his whole campaign is about anti-critical race theory, even though it doesn't exist in terms
At
of the
that level.
curriculum. Yeah, even though it's not being taught in schools like at all in the way they're saying. what you get is the motivating fear. You can bring that right to the living room that you're talking about. Evangelical or not, these suburban parents, right, are just like conscripted into a movement of paranoia and rage. And here we go, right? We're off to the races with more Trumpian politics, even if Trump himself is not present.
Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of people feared about a Trump presidency is, policy wonks or people throw around terms like the Overton window. But that just means taking what used to be a previously extreme belief and making it extremely commonplace and accepted. And that's what we're seeing within these situations, whether it's in national politics, local politics, and it is this multi. I can't think of the right word. It's a multi-pronged approach. Like it's not they're not fighting on one single level and one single way, and they're effective. Nonetheless, I actually want to sort of round out this conversation um, with something that I'm actually borrowing from your show. You actually have a recurring segment on your show that you call Reasons for Hope. It's also part of your Discord server. That's part of your Patreon features. Is that your supporters are able to provide some of their own. So I'm curious in this sort of moment after seeing some of these recent losses as well as some wins like you mentioned in Boston. Your sort of read on how we're now talking about politics today, how we're talking about white evangelical involvement in it. I mean, I know personally I'm still sort of unpacking and trying to think back about what that white evangelical support enabled, not just in 2016, but everything that led to 2016, the entire Trump administration. But I'm curious, just what you're looking at, because you are the most active podcaster. You crank out great content all the time.
When you're full of hot air, it's got to go somewhere.
Well, where
and my wife's pretty tired of it. She's pretty tired of it. So she's like, just go upstairs and turn the mic on, please. So.
I told you this one was a little loose, and Bradley just threw me off a little bit. So,
well, okay. Reasons for hope. You ready?
Yes,
let me give you some reasons for hope. I think local politics is not completely dominated by the right. So Durham, North Carolina just elects, right, a Black woman to be mayor. As I mentioned, right, Boston, Michelle Wu is elected mayor. You have measure, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was tweeting today about progressive measures passing in New York City. So there are things on the ground that are happening. And I think this goes to what we've been talking about today, Blake, is those things matter, right? That
mm-hmm.
Local politics matters in a big way. And so it's not all bad news on that front. There is good things happening across the board there. So I think that's number one. Number two, I'll bring this back to just the heart of this show and something that obviously you started, and that's the hashtag exvangelical. Is you know more than anyone, and you've written about this, you've talked about it, how scared the evangelical establishment is of the exvangelical movement in the moment, because they are getting pushback. They are seeing young people leave. If people know my story, I was a youth minister in California, Southern California. And the amount of kids who used to be in my youth group who email me today and are like, hey, Onishi, it's been a long time. I was in your youth group in 2002. And I deconstructed 2 years ago, right? Because I couldn't stand what was happening with the Trumpian takeover of my church. I just think that's happening. And it has put evangelical establishment types on their heels in a way that they're a little bit unnerved. They're a little bit frightened. And so is there a chance there to make inroads and to sort of poke holes in that seemingly impenetrable fortress of evangelical hegemony that then feeds into and helps create something like the MAGA movement? I think there is, right? So on the ex-evangelical front, I think there's hope. On the local politics front, I think there's hope. I still think there's hope in terms of Biden being willing to listen to progressive voices, whether or not we can get around the filibuster and do things like provide and ensure voting rights on a federal level, and other things that need to happen. I don't know, but those progressive fights on the ground are continuing, and I don't want people to sort of see a kind of fatalism there. Those fights are worth fighting, and they are being won, and that's politically, and that's sort of religiously too. So anyway, that's where I turn for hope.
Right. And I think I definitely agree with the things you've said. I think there are. It's not like everything's rosy. We've over 700,000 people in this country have passed away from the pandemic, and there's lots of injustice in this country. And it feels insurmountable at times. And there are things that are really, really huge and really difficult to tackle. Whether it's like it's like pick your existential crisis, like whichever one you want to have. Is it capitalism, or how fragile democracy is, or the climate, like there and racial injustice? Like there are all these things, but it is helpful to know that there are other people that are also working to combat them in whatever way they're able, and to do whatever part they are equipped to do. That's dangerously close to, to some vocational language, but you know what I mean? I mean, part of it's you can take the kid out of youth group, but
well, I would just say, what I would just say too is like, and I think a lot of folks out there know this, right? I can doom scroll Twitter all night, and I've done it many nights, and I can be overwhelmed. And I can be overwhelmed on all the fronts you just mentioned, right? Racial injustice, and travesty, the seemingly imminent economic collapse, the seemingly imminent environmental collapse, blah, blah, blah. We can go on and on and on, okay? I would just say, friends, pick one thing. Like, what is the thing that you can fight for, right? What is the thing you can do? And yes, it means you can't do everything. And you're going to have to trust that there's other people fighting other fronts and contributing in other ways. And you'll keep tabs on them, and you'll support them, and you'll help them. What's your thing? What is your thing? Is it one election, one campaign, one issue? What is it? And just go for it, right? That's what's the one thing you can do now, is what I would say. And because you can get totally paralyzed by the 100 fronts that you could fight on, and then you're not doing anything but doom scrolling under your blanket. And we've all been there, right? And so if there's anything to leave anybody with today, it's just pick a thing. And go for it.
Yeah. 100%. Like that's the other benefit of staying in a lane, is that someone else is choosing a different one, and you can just put your foot down on that pedal and go as fast as you can.
Yep.
Or don't burn out and just go an ecologically safe. I'm murdering this metaphor.
Well, but just but pick a lane and just do one thing. Like, have you all ever been in a situation where you're trying to do so many things? Like, I mean, come on. I mean, we have a newborn, and like the amount of nights where I'm like trying to make a bottle and like feed the dog and like not trip over the 19 things that are on the ground and wash the dishes and like not wake up my partner who's like sleeping for the first time in how long. And everything falls apart, right? And I guess my point with that is like, you can sit here and try and do everything and save the world, or you can pick a lane, join others in that lane and make progress, see how far you can get, and trust that everyone else around you is gonna make progress in other ways.
Yep. I love that. That's a great note to close on. Brad, thanks for talking to me. Where can people find your work? Whatever you want to mention, please mention it now.
Sure.
And you know, I know you have a ticking clock. I actually don't have a ticking clock tonight, so
I,
I'm trying
I
to get you out by the time you need to be to your
no,
next
no.
thing.
I thank you for letting me expend the hot air that is always inside of me today, Blake. You can always find me at Straight White JC, TikTok, Instagram, mainly on Twitter. Honestly, I'm at Bradley Onishi on Twitter. So we publish at Straight White JC a couple times a week. I'm writing a book for Broadleaf Books on the history of white Christian nationalism, so that'll be out in a little while here. And otherwise, straightwhiteamericanjesus.com has all our info. We have a seminar coming up if people would like to sign up, and that's in January. So if you'd like to jump into a community with other folks, check that out too.
Thank you so much, Brad, and everybody, please check out Brad and Dan's work over at the domains that Brad just mentioned, and I'll also include them in the show notes. Thanks for joining me again.
Thanks for having me, Blake. Appreciate it.